Welcome back to Inside City Hall. Our city is still in the middle of rebuilding and reshaping the economy since the COVID-19 pandemic began. But an uncertain future lies ahead. Employers are still struggling to get workers consistently back into the office. Business tax revenue in the city is expected to drop for the first time in 6 years. And the transit system faces mounting financial challenges. On top of that, according to the city controller, our city's unemployment rate rose in August, partly driven by more New Yorkers entering the job market. Joining me now to talk more about all of this is Greg Morris. He was recently announced as the new CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. Welcome to the program. Good to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for making the time for me.
Absolutely. And the coalition is one of, I think the last time I looked, it was over 100 organizations that all deal with employment training and services.
200 members in the organization, the largest workforce development association in the country. And its focus is on making sure that folks have pathways to employment and the connections between employment and education opportunity. The career sector is critical to us, but the real piece of the puzzle is, are all the right supportive services in place to ensure that New Yorkers can find a foothold in this economy and in this labor market?
So let's start with where things are. When I see that private employment is at something like 97% of its pre-pandemic peak, meaning we're almost all the way back. That doesn't match up in some ways with what I think of as a lot of people are still having a hard time. Where does the truth lie in all of
Well, I think the reality of this particular moment is the numbers we were at were, 170,000 jobs off where we were, pre-pandemic or last year. That's not insignificant. I think the reality of this particular moment is that New Yorkers who haven't historically had a foothold in the job market continue to be struggling to find a pathway. The coalition itself is focused on ensuring that folks have that foothold and that pathway, and that who are we really talking about? We're talking largely about Black and brown New Yorkers. We're talking about women in some cases. We're talking about special population, those involved in the justice system, homeless New Yorkers, other folks who haven't been able to find their place.
Yeah.
And I think, look, I think the reality of this particular moment is, and I'm going to be as transparent as I can possibly be, we are particularly challenged right now, I think, to see our city as inclusive. I think we're challenged to see our city as having true employment pathways for everyone. And I think our focus has to be on where we go next and the steps we take to ensure that this city has opportunities for folks to access a livable wage.
One of the things that makes this kind of work especially difficult is that there may be one or two big employers where Macy's will say, hey, it's time for seasonal hiring. We're going to have, 400 jobs available. That's right. But it's mostly done in 2s and 3s and 5s and 10s, right?
That's right. I mean, what happens is during certain times of the year, look, the economy is moving in a direction, although we can agree we have a very challenging potential future financial forecast for the city. So opportunities will appear. Again, are those opportunities that are going to ensure that someone has a wage that is going to be able to take care of their family? Is that going to be an opportunity where someone's going to have to find their way in a job that is not one that feels as stable as they'd like for it to be, or that they're going to be able to upskill, or they're going to be able to find a career path, whether it's in technology, healthcare, or others, that really does put them in a position to take care of themselves and their families? That's the gap right now. And I think the interest that the Adams administration has, the interest that the coalition has, if we can all sit down together, education, employers, labor, and others, foundations, other partners, sit down at the table and try to figure out how to ensure that every New Yorker has access to opportunity. That's our only way forward.
Well, your predecessor in this job, Joey Ortiz, is now part of the administration. So what's he up to, and what is the connection? How do you link arms with this administration to make all of this happen?
Well, I was part of the New York City Employment Training Coalition board before I joined in the CEO position. And I was told all along that the NYCETC was a place for all of the top tier sort of providers, training partners, folks who really think about making connections between employment and education and think about career sector. I got engaged in that, as a board member, and now to serve as CEO is obviously a thrill in a very challenging moment in our city's history. Jose Ortiz is a really tremendous sort of player in the administration right now. He's working very hard with the unit that I think the Adams administration has put together to think about where we go, to think about tying together workforce development and economic development. And I think that's the right path for us. But the reality is our coalition has to be at the table. like labor needs to be at the table, like education needs to be at the table to ensure that we have better outcomes for everyone.
Yeah, some of the key players in all of this I think of as the community colleges, where they will often do sort of non-degree programs, so certification. You go for 6 weeks and you pick up a credential, some skills training, and maybe a link to some jobs that are coming online. What are some of the sectors where that look promising to you for people who are looking for work?
I think it's an interesting moment to think about what these sectors look like. And again, I think there's been an ongoing sort of conversation about what does the finance sector look like moving forward. I think there's been ongoing conversation about what technology looks like in a new sort of economy as well. Healthcare, certainly there are pathways and others. I, luckily, during the course of my career, have had the ability to build some of those programs, so I have some familiarity with what it takes to sort of put those pieces together. That said, again, let's be clear where we're at in this particular moment. We have to rethink the way our workplaces look to be able to meet the needs of New Yorkers, and I'm not sure they're coming back the way we thought they would. The true economic engines in our neighborhoods, in the key sort of places in our city where there are opportunity, they need to rethink how this work looks and feels, and that includes, I would argue, the community college, the Department of Education. They need to think about how they're really creating career pathways. And again, the reality is that takes a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of energy, and I think the training partners we work with to make that possible.
Is it harder or substantially different to try and find somebody a job that's going to be only partly in the office and partly at home?
I have not heard at this particular moment, or our data is not suggesting to us that that's hard or not hard. What we're hearing right now is this particular moment where I think the New York City workforce in general is trying to figure out where does it fit in a new world? Where does it fit in a post-pandemic or this side of the pandemic conversation? And the reality is, I think, while there is a desire in some cases to see New Yorkers back 5 days a week, I think the reality of working from home and seat time has changed in some ways. I think for many New Yorkers, because of childcare needs, because of housing challenges, because of other supportive services that I think folks need to be able to find stability, the question about finding your way back to any place, remote or otherwise, is complicated, and we need to find our way past that. I'll also note, and I think we know this, our city in this particular moment is struggling to ensure that everybody has access to the right digital equipment that they need, broadband, to ensure that everyone can access opportunity. So remote can be a possibility for everyone.
Right, right. Well, we're in an odd place in the economy where sometimes good news is actually bad news. And I'm sure you saw this last week. There was an unemployment number that came out showing that people are getting hired, people are getting jobs. Wall Street at least interpreted it as bad news. Wall Street interpreted it as the kind of signal that will convince the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates, deliberately try and slow down the economy, deliberately try and choke off credit to businesses so that they don't expand, with negative consequences coming down the road for the clients that you serve.
Right. I mean, look, I think, again, the reality of this is I think the mayor put forward what is called Executive Order 22, which was a sort of statement that said, we're going to think about how economic development, workforce development intersects. We have an investment in what inclusivity looks like. We have a desire to bring employers to the table. We have a desire to ensure that folks can find career pathways, those who typically haven't, young adults in particular, hit harder in the pandemic than anybody else. Think about how we upskill New Yorkers as well. Think about how we find career sector pathways. That's a goal and an ambition, but it really does require us to have the hard conversations about what our city's sort of financial future really looks like. And the reality is, if we're going to continue to operate in a way where New Yorkers who have been behind, disproportionately, historically, systemically held back, held behind, it's going to continue. And I don't think that's a pathway to a new New York or the one New York I think we want for the communities and folks that we serve.
Well, you know, you keep hearing both anecdotally and statistically about what are called labor shortages. It's probably not the right word, but I saw that, you know, employment is above pre-pandemic levels when it comes to healthcare, social assistance, a number of business and professional services. That's good news. That means that we need more people than we did even before the pandemic, especially in healthcare.
Well, I think the question is that good news or is that not good news from the perspective of, are these wages at the level they need to be to ensure that people can take care of themselves and their families? Right. These are the folks that were hit hardest during the course of the pandemic. They were called to the table and had to work frontline jobs. They didn't have the luxury of working from home. You know, how did that reset the way in which they thought? How did that sort of put them on a path to stability? I think The doors are open right now to opportunity, but is that opportunity truly going to ensure that New Yorkers are better off? Is that truly an inclusive, is that truly a pathway to stability and growth for your, and ability to take care of yourself and your family? And I think there are folks in the healthcare sector that would say, that's not what I see here.
Right. You know, in the broadest sense, when I talk with representatives from, say, the Partnership for New York City,
yes,
where they're talking about the sort of the big picture about, you know, Manhattan real estate and, you know, making sure that you have a good workforce going forward. Are you in discussions with some of those, the very largest corporations, about what the next 5 to 10 years are going to look like in New York?
Yeah, I mean, the mayor's task force that's being called to the table to think about the future of workforce has, I think, significant representation from big employers, has solid representation from the educational system, DOE and CUNY. It's got the providers on the ground, elected officials and others. I think that's a great sort of pathway. I think we need to keep in mind that there's a significant number of New Yorkers who are employed in small businesses. Those folks need to be at the table. Right. Labor, of course, needs to be there as well. All this to say, we have to have a common thread in terms of what we want to accomplish. There's a history here of the city talking about career pathways, talking about we need to ensure that they're stable in this vision, this iteration of our city's future.
Okay, Greg Morris, thanks so much for coming by tonight.